Hello, everyone, and welcome to another preview on the channel. And today, of course, is the big one, the 108th edition of the Tour de France. As always, I'm joined by Mr. Critical himself, Ewan, and yes, the Tour de France, the biggest race in cycling. And Ewan, last year's edition was definitely one for the history books.
Exactly that. Last year's Tour de France was where we saw the iconic Pog v Rog battle finally hit the roads of the Tour de France. And after that exceptional final day's time trial to La Planche des Belles Filles, Tadej Pogačar became the champion of La Grande Boucle at just the age of 21 years old. Nevertheless, what an edition that was, and what an edition this year could be, as we see Pog and Rog once again.
So anyways, Ewan, what does the 2021 Tour de France route have in store for the riders?
So the 2021 Tour de France will begin on the 26th of June in Brest in Brittany. It's the fourth time that Brest will host the Grand Départ. And the first stage, in fact, will actually be a hilly affair. It finishes in Landerneau at the Côte de la Fosse aux Loups. The next day will also have an uphill finish to the Mur de Bretagne. The iconic climb of Brittany makes its return to the Tour de France yet again. Last time we were there, it was Dan Martin who took the victory. And this year, it could see another yellow jersey shakeup. Stages 3 and 4 pose less difficulty as the riders leave Brittany on those sprinters days before Stage 5's decisive 28-kilometer-long time trial from Changé to Laval. The profile is fairly flat, but with it being a time trial, it will always throw up something special in terms of GC. The next day to Châteauroux will be another sprint stage, and then Stage 7 to Le Creusot is going to be a very, very interesting classics day. It's 248 kilometers in length. It's very, very long, and with so many hills in store in the day, it could be a platform for the likes of Junior Alaphilippe. On stages 8 and 9, we will enter the Alps. Stage 8 will go to Le Grand Bornand. And stage 9, we will see Tignes back in the Tour de France. After a rest day, we will head southwards into Provence. And on stage 11, we have the iconic Mont Ventoux Ascension. We're going over it twice, but we're not going to finish at the top of the mountain. We descend down to the town of Malaucène. Anyways, for stages 12 and 13, we will skirt along the Mediterranean coast before entering the Pyrenees. Stages 16, 17, and 18 will all be mountain stages in the mountains, most decisively the finishes to Le Col de Portet and also Les Ardennes on stages 17 and 18. Before we head back to Paris, however, we do have a final time trial from Les Bournes to Saint-Emilion through the lovely vineyards of this part of France, and that will be where we see our Tour de France champion in waiting crowned before the iconic procession to Paris on stage 21. So in total, it's 58 kilometers of individual time trialing, 8 sprint stages, 5 hill stages, and 6 mountain stages, 3 of which will be summit finishes. That's your 2021 Tour de France route, and it's going to be absolutely brilliant to watch.
So anyways, Ewan, thank you for that nice wrap up of the route. And of course, now for the favorites, there is only one place to start from, and that is last year's winner of not only the yellow jersey, also the Young Riders classification and the polka dot jersey. That is, of course, the recent winner of the Tour of Slovenia, Tadej Pogačar. And yeah, last year, as you spoke earlier, it was absolutely an emphatic win. And it was, one that we're all going to remember, that final time trial up to La Plage des Belles Filles. But Ewan, do you think that the 22-year-old Tadej Pogačar is stronger than the 21-year-old Pogačar we saw last year?
I think Pogačar has proved himself a lot more this year. Last year, we were still working with the slightly unknown. We knew he was good. He came third at the Vuelta and then top 5 in Dauphiné. But this year, well, he's managed to one-up everything he's done. He won Liège-Bastogne-Liège. He's won the UAE Tour. He's won the Tour of Slovenia. And he won Tirreno Adriatico. So Tadej Pogačar still looks phenomenal. He's not left a stage race without taking a stage win this year. And if we have to compare this on last year, well, certainly Pogačar looks better. And the kind of people he's beating this year, it's a bracket higher than the build-up to last year's race. He's beaten every single Tour de France contender as such already this year. Maybe not the Ineos boys, but we'll discuss that later on. And the way that Tadej Pogačar is racing stage races at the moment is very mature. He doesn't do these reckless attacks and doesn't make these silly mistakes like bad positioning in the bunch. He's been dominant throughout every single stage race he's entered. And to be honest, I can see this happening in this year's Tour de France. If we don't see Tadej win, we will certainly see the rider from UAE take at least one stage win at this year's race. And the route, well, we might say it's Roglic focused because there's so many time trialing, but whatever Roglic can do, Pogačar can do it as well. Pogačar's double Slovenian national time trial champion, and I wouldn't put it past him to contend right from the offset on stage 5 TT.
I mean, the only blip on his record or his 2021 resume is that Tour of the Basque Country, where he finished third behind the two Jumbo-Visma riders of Roglic and Jonas Vingegaard. If you just look at it on paper, you might think that Jumbo-Visma was dominating that race, which to an extent they were, but it was more that he was trapped between being a good teammate and trying to go for his own chances with Brandon McNulty. But he did an absolutely monstrous pull in the final stage to try and bring the race back. So I think that just showed how strong Tadej Pogačar was as well, because no one was helping him there.
Exactly. And McNulty is provisionally on the start list here. So hopefully we don't have any of those problems at this year's Tour de France. But the team he's bringing is very good nonetheless. It's a very, very strong team. Provisionally, we have a long list, but we all work with what we have. And what we have is David de la Cruz, who was brilliant in 2020. He rode beside Tadej Pogačar throughout the Alps in that final week. We have Davide Formolo, who crashed out of last year's race, but he's looked good this year already at Liège-Bastogne-Liège and the Giro. Not to forget that we also have Palance and Micah, who are coming from the Tour of Slovenia that's just happened. So it seems to be a pretty harmonious team, and I can only see this year being Tadej Pogačar's second yellow jersey in his career.
I mean, yeah, the addition of Rafa Micah to the team this year is definitely going to be an asset. The former double polka dot winner at the Tour de France. So anyways, we can't say Tadej Pogačar without saying Primoz Roglic, the unfortunate second place winner, and that image is going to haunt him forever on La Plage de Belleville. Roglic, of course, chose not to go to either the Criterium du Dauphiné or the Tour de Suisse or the Tour of Slovenia. How do you see Primoz Roglic faring? He's many people's favorite due to the amount of time trialing, as you mentioned. How's his form been so far?
Well, Primoz Roglic's form has been quite good. He almost won Paris-Nice. Emphasis on almost. He won the Basque Country. He rode well at Amstel, but had some problems. Liège didn't quite go the way he wanted. Not to neglect his second place at La Flèche Wallonne, where he pulled a risky strategy of going early on the Mur de Huy. But nevertheless, Roglic is looking good. I think there's less pressure on him this year. I know that's surprising as he finished second at La Planche and lost the race, but all eyes were on Tadej Pogačar this year, more than they were last year. And Roglic had all this focus on him in 2020. We knew Jumbo-Visma was so good. They had a lot of hype running into the race when we had that condensed run-up of Tour de l'Ain, the Dauphiné, and then the Tour de France. This year, it seems a lot smoother for Jumbo-Visma. We don't have all these endless debates of, are they the best team in the peloton? Are they this? Are they that? All that focus seems to be on Ineos and UAE. So for Roglic, mentally, this can only help him. Looking at his team, it's very similar to last year. We still have the engines of Kuss and Van Aert, but also the new additions of Stefan Kruijswijk, who missed last year's race, and also Jonas Vingegaard, who is starting this year's Tour de France. He was instrumental at the Tour of the Basque Country. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this UAE team works out. And also, don't forget, they're going to be wearing new black jerseys. So they're going to be a little bit more undercover in the peloton, not quite as visible in their bright yellow.
That team is phenomenal. Like, I'm a huge Jonas Vingegaard fan. I think he's done absolutely exceptional this year, winning a stage in the UAE as well, winning the Coppi Bartoli race. But Wout van Aert was the closest rider to Tadej Pogačar in that Tirreno Adriatico. So I think that this team is monstrously strong. It'll be very interesting to see them trying to fight with UAE and Ineos. But yeah, we'll speak about Ineos in a bit. Do you think we can get a situation where there's more than one Jumbo-Visma rider in the top 10, such as we saw last year?
I'm not quite so sure, because I think we could see other teams plant multiple people in top 10. For this, I'm looking maybe towards Movistar and Ineos. I don't know about Jumbo-Visma. I think they have to go full out, really, for Roglic this time over. There's no point of salvaging a 9th place for Sepp Kuss or for Stefan Kruijswijk, instead of getting the win and going full out for Roglic. So it's going to be interesting to see what Jumbo can do this year. It might have a different approach to last year, seeing as that didn't quite work out in the end. But it will definitely be interesting to see Jumbo back on the roads of the Tour.
So anyways, the next team is, of course, the Imperios Ineos Grenadiers, who have been absolutely the team on form this year, winning dominating the Vuelta a Catalunya, winning the Tour de Romandie, winning the Giro d'Italia, winning both the pre-races for the Tour de France, the Criterium du Dauphiné and the Tour de Suisse. They really have come back with a fury after last year where they didn't quite live up to their own expectations. And Ewan, this team is absolutely phenomenal. They're not even bringing Adam Yates, but the riders they have on show, Richie Porte, third place finisher of last year's Tour de France and also the winner of this year's Criterium du Dauphiné, the 2018 Tour de France winner, Geraint Thomas. On top of that, the 2019 Giro d'Italia winner, Richard Carapaz, who finished second in the Vuelta a España last year, but has also just won the Tour de Suisse. And not forgetting the 2020 Giro d'Italia winner as well, Tao Geoghegan Hart, and also the Cima Coppi winner of the 2020 Giro d'Italia, Rowan Dennis, of course. And Ewan, this team is absolutely monstrous. And what do you think is going to happen here? A lot of these riders are very good at time trialing as well. And with this course, that could be very favorable indeed.
Yes, Ineos are fielding their best team on paper in a long time. I don't think I've seen Ineos send a team this successful in terms of people who've been up there in Grand Tours and stage races. Let's also not look past the fact that we have the former world champion and one of the best domestiques in the world, Michał Kwiatkowski, and also former European time trial champion, Jonathan Castroviejo, who also rode the Giro d'Italia this year. So this really is a almost fantasy team. However, when it comes down to the leader, who's it going to be? There are 4 different cards you could play. It could be Tao Geoghegan Hart, it could be Geraint Thomas, it could be Richard Carapaz, or it could be Richie Porte. Who do you want it to be? That is the big question in this team. For me personally, I would go for Geraint Thomas. I think the team would probably think that Thomas is the least risky strategy. He won the 2018 edition ahead of Tom Dumoulin at his peak, I would say, and also Chris Froome at the time. So he definitely can prove himself at a race, and the podium the year after proved that. In terms of the others on the team, well, we've got Richie Porte. Okay, Richie Porte came 3rd last year. That's good for him. Has he ever podiumed another Grand Tour? No. Has he ever finished in the top 4 of another Grand Tour? No. Geraint Thomas has a better record than him at Tour de France's, one would say. So Geraint Thomas there is the proven character. He can ride a 3-week Grand Tour very consistently. He has a lot of bad luck, but he can still ride it very well. I would place him as the leader. Then you have the wild card. The wild card from Karachi in Ecuador. That is Richard Carapaz. What is he going to do? Well, he is a massive wild card. When we saw him working alongside Bernal last year, he was not really working as a domestique as such. I know him and Bernal only really had 1 week of riding together in the mountains, but we didn't quite see Carapaz be this exciting Grand Tour contender that we saw at the Giro in 18, 19, and last year's Vuelta. But it could all change on the road. Everyone says Richard Carapaz isn't the best time trialist in the world, but look at how he performed at the Tour de Suisse time trial. It was still pretty good. And I would give it to him and say, you're in a good position to do well. The only problem is that there are a lot of downhill finishes, and I would say Carapaz is better at these uphill punchy finishes that we don't quite have as many of this year. We only have 3 summit finishes this year, so that limits the opportunities for Carapaz. But it's an open book. It's an open book, and it's going to be very interesting to see this Team Ineos dynamic.
So anyways, Ewan, hypothetically, we're on the Col du Portet, and what does the peloton look like here for Ineos Grenadiers? Are they taking control of the peloton, or are they relying on Jumbo-Visma or UAE Team Emirates? We've seen Ineos Grenadiers, they very much like to be this juggernaut team that just ride everyone to dust, and then their leader basically finishes off their work. With this team being, quite different in a way, who do they work for? And do they do the work, or do they just let Jumbo-Visma do all the work?
Well, this is the problem with there being so many super teams almost in this year's edition. If Ineos take up control and they burn the matches of Rowan Dennis, Castroviejo, and luxury teammate Giro d'Italia champion Tao Geoghegan Hart early on a climb like the Col du Portet, then you're taking the work away from Jumbo-Visma, who have Wout van Aert, who have Stefan Kruijswijk, Sepp Kuss, and so forth. So it's a very, very difficult scenario for them. Which super team is going to be the dominant one? We've got 3 of them if you want to include UAE as well. So this whole dynamic could also build into the way that the race runs. It could allow an underdog maybe to do well. And because if Uran attacks on a climb, are Ineos going to chase? Well, they might not, because they don't want to give an easy ride to Jumbo or UAE. So a wild card could really disrupt this from another team completely. So it's going to be very, very difficult to control this. But Ineos are a smart team. They're director sportifs. They're very knowledgeable. They're very good tactically. So we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out. But this could even be the whole debate over the next 3 weeks.
So anyways, you can't say super team without mentioning Movistar, of course. Movistar have relied on this trident that we've seen in recent years with, well, we saw it with Landa, Valverde and Nairo Quintana, and didn't quite live up to what they expected there. But nevertheless, they're doing the same tactic. If it fails once, do it again and do it until it fails. And this time they're bringing the ever youthful 41-year-old Valverde, who recently won a stage in the Criterium du Dauphiné. They're, of course, also bringing Enric Mas, who finished 5th in last year's edition of the Tour de France and 5th in the Vuelta a España that year as well. And then also the 6th place finisher of that year's edition, which was Miguel Angel Lopez, who recently won the Mont Ventoux Challenge as well. So Ewan, Movistar, they're definitely looking to win the contest that most people don't care about, the team classification. But do you think that this is going to be a successful edition of their beloved trident?
I mean, Movistar loved the team classification. They justified it very well in the recent series of The Least Expected Day on Movistar on Netflix. And the team managers say that they like having all the riders on the final podium in Paris, and it motivates the team to get on that final podium. However, this team is not motivating me. It has Miguel Angel Lopez. Okay, that's cool. He came 6th in last year's race. He came 6th at the Dauphiné. He won the Mont Ventoux Challenge very, very dominantly, by the way, and the Ruta del Sol. But the Mont Ventoux Challenge and the Ruta del Sol didn't really have this Tour de France level start list. He went to Romandie, didn't quite click there, and he hasn't really been up there in a World Tour race. I think he messed up Dauphiné completely tactically. He looked quite good climbing-wise, but I just don't see him contending this year's Tour, to be honest. And when we look at Mas, well, Mas was brilliant last year. He rode very pragmatically, but he still had this whole problem with Valverde and having to prove himself to the team directors. And I hope he doesn't have to do that again this year with Valverde yet again, because that, I think, is their downfall. Scott, when was the last time Movistar podiumed the Tour de France?
Quintana 2016.
Exactly. And what has happened to Movistar tactically since 2016? Well, they've gone for this three-pronged or multiple-pronged approach, and it hasn't worked. You had Mikel Landa probably in his physical peak in 2018 and 19 not being able to reach the podium. You had Quintana look good in 2018 and failed to reach the podium. And last year, Mas could have been higher than 5th place if they didn't say to Valverde, well, this is yours, Valverde. Go for the stage. Mas, ride for him till the end. Because we saw that even at the Grand Colombier. Mas was riding for Valverde when Mas could have done something better for GC. It makes no sense. Movistar baffle me in terms of their tactics. But you know what? I'm ready to be proved wrong. But that might have to wait another 12 months.
So anyways, the last of the favorites we're going to consider could equally also be an outsider, but he did really well at the Tour de Suisse, finishing 2nd. And he was also 2nd in the 2017 Tour de France. Of course, that is Rigoberto Uran. And he's coming here with EF Education Nippo. And Ewan, do you think he is one to watch for this year's edition?
Yes, I think Rigoberto Uran is probably one of these people we have to consider. I mentioned his name earlier when discussing the Ineos tactics. And I think Rigoberto Uran could be someone who could benefit from all these super teams being around. And when you look at Uran's form this year, it's been hit or miss. But recently, very much a hit. He came 2nd at the Tour de Suisse, as you mentioned, even winning a time trial at this year's Tour de Suisse. Outside of Roglic this year, and maybe Lutsenko, Uran is the only favorite to have won a time trial in 2021. That wasn't a national championship. So it looks very, very good for Uran in terms of his build up to this race. And he definitely still has a Tour de France in his legs. Every now and then he rides an absolutely brilliant Grand Tour. 2017 Tour de France, he rode very well, very under the radar. Similarly, in 2014 at the Giro, he was quite under the radar, rode very well in the TTs to put himself in a good position. That was 7 years ago now, but I think Uran could replicate that this year by riding very well in the TTs, hanging on there in the mountains, and mixing in the top 5 of this race. Considering his teammates, the brilliant Sergio Higuita and Neilson Paulus, well, it looks very good for them. Paulus rode very well at the UAE Tour earlier this year, and he was very interesting in the breakaways at last year's Tour de France. Higuita, well, Paris-Nice was his thing last year. He's ridden well since then, rode very well at the Jebel Hafid at the UAE Tour, and I'm expecting big things from the Colombian champion. So Rigoberto Uran could be someone for you guys to place an each way bet on if you're willing to let some cash go.
Now we come to the outsiders of this year's Tour de France. And for the French public and French cycling fans, there's one record or curse, if you will, that they really want to see the back of. And that is, of course, that the last rider to win the Maillot Jaune was, of course, Bernard Hinault back in 1985. And Ewan, there are some French riders who are wanting to be that rider to end this long curse. And who are they, essentially?
Well, first of all, we have to look towards the rainbow jersey, Julien Alaphilippe of the Koenig Quick-Step. He is going into this race as a GC leader as such. He, of course, spent 14 days in the yellow jersey in 2019 after winning 2 stages there, and he's wanting to replicate that this year. The 2020 Tour de France didn't quite go to plan. He, of course, won stage 2 to Nice, but then lost the yellow jersey due to a feeding error later on that week, and I think that sent him on a downward spiral. He came back fighting after winning the World Championships, and I think he wants to honor that jersey on the 2021 race. In terms of where he can strike, well, the hills of this race are quite prevalent in the first week, and as a classics man, he should definitely maximize those chances. Stage 1 to Landerneau ends on an uphill. If he can get a top 3 there, well, that's easily some extra seconds for the fight for yellow. And then the day after is the Mur de Bretagne. If you have to pick someone for the Mur de Bretagne finish, Julien Alaphilippe is the standout. If it's not Alaphilippe, well, who's it going to be? Maybe Van der Poel or Van Aert, but Alaphilippe is certainly one of the best riders to win on a day like that and scoop up the extra bonus seconds. Later on that week, we have a time trial. Alaphilippe has won time trials in the past. He looked very good at the Swiss time trial, finishing second there before pulling out overnight. And stage 7 to Le Creusot, it's perfect. It has Alaphilippe's name written all over it. It's 250 kilometers in length, and it looks like Liège-Bastogne-Liège or something from the Ardennes. So he's definitely someone to watch out for this, for the French. And if you're looking for someone to watch in the Bleu, Blanc et Rouge for France, David Gaudu of Groupama Française des Jeux is someone else to keep your eye on. The Breton rider has ridden well this year. He's taken a win at the Basque Country. He's also taken a win at the Faune Ardèche Classic earlier on this year, alongside a top 10 at the Critérium du Dauphiné and at the aforementioned Basque Country. So David Gaudu is looking good. However, we have Arnaud Démare in this team and a split focus for Française des Jeux. But Gaudu is feisty. He's someone who will attack and attack well. But Scott, I don't quite see this route working in his favor. There's far too much time trialing.
Out of the 2 riders, yeah, David Gaudu has been really impressive. Like in the Tour of the Basque Country, he was very strong. But out of the 2, because of all this time trialing, I think it does favor Julien Alaphilippe, who did really well in the recent time trials, as you mentioned, in the Tour de Suisse. And of course, he also demonstrated in the Ardennes Classics. He did absolutely phenomenal, winning La Flèche Wallonne, coming quite high up in Amstel Gold, and second in Liège-Bastogne-Liège. I mean, it would be very interesting to see if the rainbow jersey can be in the front of the race. We haven't seen that since Cadel Evans back in 2010. So it'll be very interesting to see for sure. So anyways, Ewan, there's of course another rider that we haven't spoken about who's French, who did really well at the Tour de France and the Critérium du Dauphiné, despite having a few crashes. And that is, of course, Guillaume Martin. Do you not see this Frenchman doing better than his 11th place last year?
Well, I'm quite unsure about Guillaume Martin. He's always stuck in this position at the lower top 10 or in top 20, but never quite gets the big cheese of victory. He's had it once this year already at the new Mercantour Classique Alpes-Maritimes, which was a very tough one-day mountain race. He beat Aurélien Paris-Peintre there, a rider that will be very exciting at this year's Tour de France. But in terms of his results this year, it's been a top 10 at Paris-Nice. That was very good. Top 20s across the board at the Spring Classics, and then a 20th place at Dauphiné, recovering from an injury. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what Martin can do. But with these 60 kilometers of time trialing on offer, that works completely against Guillaume Martin of Cofidis. So it's a complicated scenario for him and for his team, who could easily get some mountain stage victories from the breakaway. But we'll have to wait and see what this Norman rider can do on La Grande Boucle this year.
So anyways, one of the teams that has not been known for doing good GCs in the Tour de France, but have done really well in the points classification. Okay, in 2019, Emmanuel Buchmann did very well, finishing 4th. But Bora Hansgrohe, Ewan, many people hassle us when we don't include them in our previews. And this year, they are bringing a very strong team. They've got Wilco Kelderman, who finished 3rd in last year's Giro d'Italia. Looked like he was going to take that Giro, but didn't quite happen. And Emmanuel Buchmann as well. Do you think this could be a very strong team, potentially troubling the top 10, top 5 even?
Well, Bora are interesting this year. We don't see Pascal Ackermann being chosen. We don't see Maximilian Schachmann being chosen. Two riders I would have loved to have seen on the start list, particularly Schachmann. But instead, we have Wilco Kelderman, we have Emil Boutman, we have Pat Conrad. Let's also not forget Ida Schelling, who we picked up a lot this year already. So this is a very, very solid team. And Wilco Kelderman looked brilliant at the Dauphiné. The way he rode the time trial was very, very solid. And he managed to sneak his way into 4th place in GC with some strong finishes on the mountain stages. So Wilco Kelderman definitely is someone to keep your eye on. He's 30 years old now. He's hitting the traditional peak of his Grand Tour career. And I think he could sneak into top 10, especially with Pestelberger being here to work for him, Boutman, Conrad, and so forth. It's going to be a solid GC effort. And Bora are kind of in the fringe in this Tour de France of being a super team. They don't quite have any big winners. Boukman's never won a big GC in a race. Kelderman is lacking a big GC result that isn't his Giro finish. So this really is a solid team. However, this split, which we'll talk about between him and Peter Sagan, will be troubling for them on the sprinters days, whether Pestelberger goes all out for helping in the sprints instead of the mountains and so forth.
So anyways, one last team to consider in this outsiders, and for many people that has induced a lot of rage on our channel when we spoke about it before, and that is of course Israel's Stardom Nation. And no, the outsider isn't Mr. Chris Froome, the 4-time winner of the Tour de France. We spoke about that in length, why he shouldn't be the leader. And they even came out and said he isn't going to be the leader for the team. It is, of course, the Canadian Mike Woods, who finished 5th at the Tour de Suisse and is a very punchy rider and has looked really good. But Ewan, do you think this route is just going to be a no-show for Israel Stardom Nation because of the amount of time trials that we have?
Well, it's nice for Israel Stardom Nation to come along and to see the lovely scenery of France. I think they'll really enjoy that, especially Chris Froome, who'll be seeing the Alps in slow motion almost at the back of the peloton. But nevertheless, in terms of their leader, Mike Woods, well, I don't know. I don't know what he's going to see in this race. It could be the front of the race, but I'm thinking that a stage win would be a much better target for Woods in this race. He hasn't top 10 the Grand Tour in a while. I think that was the Mike Woods of old, going for top 10s in GC instead of being this punchy rider that we know now. And a solid result in those Swiss stage races, Romandie and Suisse, proved that he does have some good legs on him. But I can't see it. I really can't see it. And I think his energy would be much better spent going for a stage win at the Col de Porte or maybe at the Mont Ventoux stage to Malocène instead of searching out a 10th, 9th, 11th place in GC. But it all depends on what Israel Startup Nation want to do as a team. They could try to replicate what happened with Dan Martin at the Giro and get a top 10 and a stage win. So we'll have to wait and see. This one will be an interesting discussion, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot about Chris Froome over the next few weeks.
So anyways, now we come to the green jersey, and last year we saw the first Irish winner of the competition since 1989 when Sean Kelly was the victor on that occasion. And it was, of course, Sam Bennett who ended the reign of Peter Sagan. Peter Sagan arrived for the first time in Champs-Élysées without wearing green since he started the Tour de France back in 2012. So Ewan, where best to start then with the Kona Quickstep? There has been a bit of discussion that Mark Cavendish, a previous winner of the green jersey, could potentially be starting. The 36-year-old has been having kind of a resurgence this year, but all eyes are, of course, on Sam Bennett. And the only reason Mark Cavendish is being mentioned is because Sam Bennett has a knee injury. And Ewan spoke about this before, but a fresh Sam Bennett would definitely be the rider for this competition this year as well.
Of course, Sam Bennett is one of the riders to beat this year. If he's back on full acceleration, that is, after his injury, then he will be quite the force to be reckoned with. He's had stage wins on the World Tour level at the UAE Tour and then at Paris-Nice. He's been looking good since Paris-Nice, winning the OxyClean Classic Brugge de Ponne, catchy name that, and also finishing top 3 at the Cel de Prijs before 2 stage wins at the Volta al Algarve. So he's looking good, but that injury will be plaguing him. I think he's definitely wanting to come here at the Tour de France and contend. He has 2 days to warm into this with Landerneau and the Mur de Bretagne, but then very quickly afterwards, he gets some sprint stages in that first week. The first week is fairly flat. in fact. So it'll be important for Sam Bennett to be up there very quickly in this race. Looking at his teammates, well, he's got a strong team around him. We have Kasper Asgreen, Mikkel Mørkøv, Ballerini, and Tim de Klerk. These are all guys who have worked with him before and provide a very, very solid sprint train, particularly Mørkøv and Ballerini. Mørkøv being the best lead-out man on the pro cycling scene right now. So Bennett has all the ingredients for a green jersey victory. It's just dependent on whether his knee is okay.
So anyways, one of the other riders who's on form this year for sure. He's recently taken 2 stage wins in the Belgian Tour, and he took 2 stage wins in the Giro d'Italia. That is, of course, Caleb Ewan. And he has stated this goal that he wants to take a stage win in every single Grand Tour this year. And Ewan, do you think that might hamper the ambitions of Lotto Soudal potentially taking the green jersey this year? Or do you think he has basically focused the Tour de France as the opportunity where he can take the points classification and then he'll recover enough for the Welter to take an early win there?
I don't know. Caleb Ewan is the kind of rider to contend the stages when he can, but he neglects a green jersey campaign. We've seen this in the past where he'll get maybe first and second on these sprint days and then finish 55th another day, or he won't contend an intermediate sprint. At this year's Giro, he was in the Maglia Ciclamino after his 2 stage wins, but he didn't contend the jersey at all. Last year at the Tour de France, he won stage 3, the first proper routine sprint stage, but didn't contend the proper green jersey for the rest of that race. So it depends what Caleb's strategy is. I think he's very content just to take 3 stage wins and come 3rd or 4th in that classification. But he has been sprinting very, very well, almost better than Sam Bennett. I would put my money on Caleb Ewan to be the king of the sprints in the first week, but when it comes to a green jersey battle at the Tour de France, you have to go for the sprints in the middle of the stage. They're worth up to 20 points. They're very, very valuable in that classification. And if you hang about on these hillier days to contend to finish there, well, you can sweep up an extra 15, 20 points. So Caleb just needs to figure out what his strategy is. He's certainly capable of it, but does he want it? That is the question.
So Caleb Ewan took 2 stage wins in the Giro d'Italia, but one of the riders that he beat on those 2 stages was, of course, the overall winner of the points classification in the Giro d'Italia, and that was Peter Sagan. And Peter Sagan, of course, is looking for his 8th points classification jersey here in the Tour de France, and he was beaten quite convincingly by Sam Bennett. But do you think Peter Sagan has had a bit of resurgence?
For Peter Sagan, well, this is going to be very challenging for him. Sagan doesn't quite have the same kick as he had maybe 3 years ago, even when he had the rainbow jersey, and his winning tally says a lot since then. He's won a stage of this year's Giro, but that was orchestrated by his team more than his own ability. And I think he will struggle to contend with Sam Bennett, Caleb Ewan, and so forth. One thing that he has going for him in this year's race is that there are so many question marks surrounding Caleb Ewan, surrounding Sam Bennett, and the other sprinters on this start list. So Sagan might be able to monopolize on the other riders' misfortune, maybe pulling out like he did at the Giro, and get a green jersey that way. But I don't think we're going to see a stellar Peter Sagan over the next 3 weeks, to be honest.
So anyways, one of the most exciting teams on the circuit right now, that is, of course, Alpecin Fenix, who did really well in the Giro d'Italia, taking the first Grand Tour win with Tim Merlier, who's coming here as well. Jasper Philipsen, who took the Schelde Prijs, and of course, the superstar / demigod of cycling, Mathieu van der Poel. Do you think between the 3 of them, potentially we could see, well, we'll probably see multiple stages from this team, we hope. But do you think that there could be a green jersey campaign from one of them, maybe?
If we had a green jersey based on multiple teammates, then this is the team to watch. But that's not how the Tour de France works. And I'm not sure that's how Alpecin Fenix will work. They have Jasper Philipsen, they have Tim Merlier, and also Mathieu van der Poel, all of which could win a stage. It depends whether they try to focus on winning green with one of them. Probably most obviously would be Mathieu van der Poel. Such a consistent sprinter. He wins uphill, flats, anything really. Van der Poel can throw his hand at. He can win. So for Alpecin Fenix, it's going to be interesting to see their strategy as well. But Van der Poel could do it. He will definitely contend in intermediate sprints. He's the kind of person to win on stage 1, then maybe get a top 5 on stage 3 of this year's edition. So Van der Poel is absolutely formidable and will be formidable over these 3 weeks. Question though here with Van der Poel is the Olympic Games. He says that he wants to go for the Olympic Games, so that requires him to fly to Japan, maybe self-isolate, maybe do all this kind of thing, and also change his focus to mountain biking. So that might hamper whether he stays in the whole 3-week duration of this race. But if not, then Alpecin Fenix winning the green jersey could be very, very cool.
So, of course, there's also one rider representing the French fans in the points classification, and that is, of course, Arnaud Démare, who was absolutely supremely dominant in the 2020 Giro d'Italia. So anyways, Arnaud Démare, he has picked up a handful of stage wins, none of them in the World Tour. And Ewan, do you think potentially Arnaud Démare could somehow reclaim that form, that absolutely dominant form that he had in the 2020 Giro? The caveat on that is they are, of course, Groupama FDJ bringing David Gaudu. They didn't have that problem in the Giro d'Italia. It was very much a team built around him. But yeah, we've seen that with so many teams that they're going for two different things. And yeah, where do you rate Arnaud Démare's chances this year?
Well, Arnaud Démare was the sprinter of 2020, but 2021 hasn't quite worked out. He's taken quite a few wins, but these are at these smaller French races like La Rue d'Occitanie or Boucle de la Mayenne, and these races that aren't quite the same prestige as the wins that Caleb Ewan and Sam Bennett are getting. And when you look at the people he's beating, they're not quite World Tour level. It's Jonah Beresturi and Stanislav Aniałkowski. And when he has contended sprints against the likes of Sam Bennett and so forth, he hasn't won. Paris-Nice stage 1, he came second to Bennett. Also at the Tour de la Provence, he came second to Davide Barrini of the Koenig Quickstep. So he doesn't quite seem to have the kick in 2021 to defeat these big juggernauts of the sprinting field. But Arnaud Démare is obviously a very, very accomplished sprinter. He's taken 2 Tour de France stages in the past, in 2017 at Vittel and also in 2018. So he can do it. I just don't know if he will be able to do it this year. He's bringing quite a few of his sprinting buddies. Of course, Groupama Française des Jeux were one of the best lead-out teams of last year. This year, they're bringing Guarnieri, Kung, Sinkeldam, Konovalovas, and Scotts in here. All were part of that formidable 2020 sprinting train. So Démare has a team to do it. It's just whether he has the kick to finish it off when he's up against Caleb Ewan and Sam Bennett in the end.
So anyways, now we come to our favorite part of the show, and that is the predictions round. And last year, Ewan actually did particularly well in the Tour de France edition because you said Roglic was going to finish second and Landa fourth, and both of them did so. But nevertheless, Ewan, are you going to do the same thing this year? Who do you think is going to be the podium for this year's Tour de France?
Well, we've spoken so much about super teams in this episode, and I've done 3 super teams on the podium. Third place will be Geraint Thomas of Team Ineos Grenadiers. If he doesn't fall off, that's another thing I still think could happen. Geraint Thomas falls off and crashes. If not, it'll be someone else from that conveyor belt. Second place will be Primož Roglič of Jumbo-Visma, and the winner will be Tadej Pogačar of UAE Team Emirates. He just has the best kick out of all of them. He can time trial with the best, and he's got the reinforcements in the mountains this year to tee him up towards a second Maillot Jaune.
So anyways, I'm not completely going to copy your podium, but it's going to be very alike. I think the winner on this occasion is, of course, going to be Tadej Pogačar. Second place, we're going to have Geraint Thomas, and then we're going to have Julien Alaphilippe. So anyways, the next competition that we're going to go to, we didn't actually speak about it until then. But I've been wearing it all through the video, so that makes up for it. Last year's winner of that was, of course, Tadej Pogačar as well. So, Ewan, who do you think is going to be the polka dot jersey winner this year?
This is hard, but I'm going to say Simon Yates.
I'm going to go in a kind of similar fashion, like a GC rider who isn't quite there. And I'm going to say Vincenzo Nibali. And of course, also the points classification jersey. Last year, as we spoke about, it was Sam Bennett. But Ewan, who do you think is going to take it this year?
I think Sam Bennett will do it again this year. I think he'll find his legs at the race. If he was really that injured, then it would be completely out of the question that he'd go to the Tour.
I'm going to be hopeful, optimistic here, and I hope that we'll see Mathieu van der Poel take it on this occasion. So another jersey, another Tadej Pogačar win last year, and that is, of course, the white jersey. And Ewan, who do you think is going to take this jersey?
I mean, Tadej Pogačar takes this easily.
I mean, I'm going to replicate that as well. Like, yeah, Tadej Pogačar for both of us there. And also the competition that Movistar have and Ineos have done particularly well in, the team classification, who do you think is going to be the strongest team of this year?
Okay, so for the team, I know Movistar love to win this, but I'm going to say this year it's going to be Ineos Grenadiers.
I was going to say the same, but I mean, just to be different, I'll say Jumbo-Visma. And now we come to the bonus round, and this preview, it's going to be where will the 4 times champion Chris Froome finish in this year's edition?
I think Chris Froome will finish this year's edition at home on the south coast of France. He's not going to finish. He's going to be watching this on his big old TV with Nico Rosberg by his side, commenting on how great it would have been to be there, but he's not.
I'm going to be a bit more hopeful and say he finishes in 25th.
Have you been watching Chris Froome this year?
I'm being optimistic.
25th, that's more than optimistic. I think Caleb Ewan's going to climb better than Chris Froome.
So anyways, that's it for this Tour de France preview. And as always, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel because we're going to be doing a lot of videos on this year's Tour de France. But yeah, Ewan, what else do people have to watch out for as well?
Well, if you're going to be watching the Tour de France at your local cycling cafe or your local bar, you might want to represent the Cycling Dame brand. And if you want to do that, then you can head over to our web store and buy a t-shirt or a phone case or maybe even a hoodie. Who knows? It might be a bit warm. It's July. But nevertheless, head over to the store and check out our new clothing range.
That is, of course, all down in the description down below. And all that remains to be said now is thank you, as always, for watching and have a nice day.